Hi, everyone. My name is Abera Peace Academa, and I am excited to be talking to you all about my master's thesis. So when Tracy first reached out to me on LinkedIn, my first reaction was to screenshot the text, and I forwarded it to my friends because I wanted to make sure that the text was real or fake. Now, when we ascertained that she was being for real, I responded, and here we are. Now, I am incredibly honored and thankful to talk about my master's thesis, which explored the political economy of homophobia in Nigeria and how neoliberal and neocolonial machinations underpinned the anti-gay law in Nigeria. Now, in the interest of time, we won't explore that part of my analysis, but instead focus more so on the scoping review of the health impacts of this legislation on the queer community in Nigeria. And the critical social theory and the political economy lenses will guide my analysis. Now, a bit of background. The first set of anti-gay law in Nigeria was introduced by the British colonial government in 1914, with the goal being to expand the colonial and imperialist project. Now, after independence in 1960, these laws were retained and sort of enforced subtly as vestiges of colonialism. Now, however, in 2006, a new bill to criminalize homosexuality was introduced by the then Minister of Justice in Nigeria. And this bill was, of course, rejected in 2007. However, in 2008, a new bill was introduced, and this time sort of aimed to criminalize both queer people and their allies. Also, I want to note that when I say queer, I'm employing that term as both a political and reclaimed term to acknowledge all the sex and gender performances that do not fit within the binary. After much deliberation, on December 17th, 2013, the then President, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, assented the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. And in January 2014, the legislation went into full effect. Now, this legislation, the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act of 2014, not only criminalizes queer people to up to 14 years of imprisonment, but also sentences their allies to 10 years. I am interested in, public health and LGBTQ health and access to health and all that great stuff. But before we are able to make any recommendations or programs or interventions, we must first of all understand what is going on or what has been done. And this aspect of my thesis sort of focuses on the health impacts. So on the screen is my methods and methodology and how I approached the research. I use the Axel O'Malley approach to scoping review, as well as the Braun and Clark's approach to thematic analysis. And here are my inclusion and exclusion criteria. And based on these criteria, 34 articles were included in the review. But just a general overview of, or rather observation of the trends around this particular discourse, I noted that majority of the research focused heavily on residents in metropolitan city, which I guess has to do with the issues of accessibility, but also majority of the studies focused heavily on gay, bisexual men who have sex with men. And this is really an overwhelming gap. This is a trend. In fact, research has shown that scholarly adventures or scholarly gestures often focuses more on gay, bisexual men who have sex with men. And it really is an overwhelming gap, or there really is an overwhelming gap on the material and discursive ways in which lesbians, bisexual, and transgender women are affected. This is not a finding that is, isolated to Nigeria only. It actually is a general trend in LGBTQ plus discourse. Using an inductive thematic approach, I was able to identify 4 themes. So stigma and discrimination, fear and all healthcare avoidance, physical and sexual violence, and poor mental health. Now, moving on to my first theme, which is stigma and discrimination. This theme was quite fascinating for me, particularly because of the hierarchies and complexities associated with stigma. Now, several participants in the review included in this thesis talked about the various layers of stigma that they experience. Now, whether it's internalized homophobia or that has since heightened since the SSMPA, or whether it's the societal impact of the law and how it impedes their livability. In fact, several participants in the review talked about facing eviction or being fired or denied jobs on the account of their sexuality. I have included one of the sentences that I found quite interesting in the review on the ways that queer people are discriminated against. Now, the second theme that emerged is the theme of fear and or healthcare avoidance. Now, this particular theme was identified in 15 articles and manifested in many ways. And I sort of want to highlight the work of Schwartz et al. And Isaac Buchanan. So Schwartz et al.'s work was one of the first research that noted the significant decrease in health program attendance pre the law and post law. So in this study, about 756, pre-SSMP, pre the anti-gay law, about 756 men who have sex with men participated in the baseline procedures regarding HIV prevention and HIV treatment. But once the anti-gay law went into effect, the attendance decreased to 420. Isaac and Buchanan also noted that in their own healthcare program, that a lot of HIV positive, well, first of all, they saw a decrease in attendance, but they also noted that most of their HIV positive participants were not only hesitant to attend, but they were unwilling to pick up their antiretroviral medications. Several other studies sort of highlighted that men who have sex with men or gay, bisexual men who have sex with men were reluctant to test for HIV or STI, with other people reporting that they felt more comfortable testing from the comfort of their home. Now, a particular sub-theme sort of emerges, which is the lack of access. And this sub-theme, again, I find quite fascinating because of the way that the SSMPA or the anti-gay law in Nigeria moralizes healthcare. And in such moralization, LGBTQ plus people or queer people are sort of deemed unfit to access healthcare. In fact, we also have the part about the lack of LGBTQ plus friendly facilities, queer people feeling like they can't fully come out to their medical or healthcare providers. In one of the studies included in this review by Ogini et al., they surveyed medical students, and they found that a majority of them believed that healthcare workers should report LGBTQ plus people who come in seeking for help. And others displayed a huge intolerance towards queer people. Now, the next theme that emerged is the theme of physical and sexual violence, and it was identified in 19 articles. This theme also, it's fascinating to me, and it's akin to the first theme in terms of the levels, or rather the hierarchies embedded. So we have interpersonal violence, we have familial violence, communal violence, and also the violence that occurs on a more societal level that is made possible by the SSMPA. Now, on an interpersonal and familial level, we are seeing things like, friends abusing their queer friends, or parents abusing and beating up their children due to their sexualities. We are also seeing students reporting things like that they face various challenges like bullying and extortion. I believe that one of the studies included by, and it was done by Human Rights, they reported that as soon as the law went into effect in 2014, a mob violently attacked about 14 to 40 men in Abuja. And while they were attacking these men, they were chanting things like, "No more gays, no more homosexuality. We are doing the work of Jonathan Goodluck Ebele," which is the then president, right? Then on a societal level, we see things like, several arrests being made of people who are perceived to be gay. In fact, in one of the studies by Ogbanjo et al., the participants the participant attested that they have to mask how they present in the society. When going out, they often feel compelled to dress more masculine just to avoid arrests by police. And then we also have the part about corrective rape of both men and women. I've also included a study Um, I also, previous slide, I also included a study by Secconi et al. On the experiences of social oppression among men who have sex with men. And in this study, about 20.3% of the respondents experienced at least one incident of violence, with 16.8 reporting rape by a man, whereas 16.8, 19.2, and 20.3 of the respondents reported verbal, physical, and psychological abuse respectively. Now, moving on to the final theme that emerged, which is the theme of poor mental health. This theme was identified in 11 studies, and there is not a lot of studies out there that sort of explore the mental health of queer people in Nigeria. But one of the studies that identified this theme noted that men who have sex with men tend to score very low in the societal domain in the regards of their quality of life. A study by Ileka talked about how depression and suicidal ideation among the participants, and how most of the participants were sort of really depressed after witnessing their friends either being burnt alive or die as by suicide. A comparative study on the rates of depression by Ogini noted that gay men were 4 times more likely to be depressed than their straight counterparts. Now, I also want to be very clear here that this depression is not caused, it's not a consequence of their sexuality, but rather a function of the harsh environment that LGBTQ plus people are often subjected to or often find themselves living in. A somewhat different pattern emerges with this theme when we look at the relationship between alcohol or substance use and sexual risk taking. You know, so many participants reported using alcohol and and different substances to cope. So they have a maladaptive coping strategy. They reported using drugs to feel happier, to feel relaxed, to be able to confront, to even step out the house, to boost their self-esteem. And a lot of them reported that in return, they engage in sexual risk-taking under the influence of alcohol. So these are some of the ways that the SSMPA affect LGBTQ plus people in Nigeria. Now, while moving on to our discussion, like while these issues, things like poor mental health and violence may seem as troubles of daily living, for queer people, it's different. In fact, these troubles, and using the word trouble really waters down what is happening. But these things are often state sanctioned and legitimized. And for me, I'm really interested in the way that political economy sort of makes clearer what is happening. Now, the finding of this review that LGBTQ plus people have poorer mental health than their heterosexual counterparts is consistent with other studies in literature, other studies. But then when we use a critical theory lens, we are able to draw a pattern on a transnational level where members of racialized communities in the West have high rates of homophobia. And here I want to remind us all again that the first set of anti-gay laws in Nigeria was introduced by the British colonial government that deemed the African body as immoral and bestial and hypersexual. So I think that there is something to be said that that despite homosexuality really being legalized in some Western countries, members of racialized communities have high rates of homophobia. And then that presents us with a huge implication, because what it means for Nigeria is that repealing the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act is not enough. There has to be a structural decolonization going on. There has to be an unlearning of what sexualities we see as norm and which ones we sort of render unintelligible and deserving of criminalization. Now, another finding of this review talked about, the rates of how SSMPA sort of increased the rate of physical and sexual violence against LGBTQ plus people. And I think that a good example to buttress that is in the EndSARS case, where in October 2020, several Nigerian youths took to the streets of Lagos to protest against the ongoing police brutality. And LGBTQ plus people, of course, participated in this protest, giving their own unique experiences with the police. But in this protest, they were attacked and framed as distractions. In fact, many people were saying stuff like, there is no room for LGBTQ plus people in Nigeria, or leave that to the West, or even people saying things like one problem after the other. Let's focus on fighting police brutality. Afterwards, we can fight for queer rights. And that is really fascinating, given that the police have been implicated they have been implicated as perpetrators of violence against queer people in Nigeria. But when we use the critical social theory and political economy tool, it will help us understand the way that homophobia is not merely one's display of their own beliefs, but rather calculated political tool. When the colonizers arrived in Nigeria, as with other parts of Africa, one of the very first things they did was to criminalize the African sexuality. And by doing that, they were able to foster their own ongoing colonial project. In post-colonial Nigeria, the question remains, what are these laws doing, right? Who is this law benefiting? And this is where it becomes important to sort of focus on the trends going on when the SSMPA was signed. For instance, the anti-gay law, the SSMPA, was not signed into law the first time the president took over the office, but instead it was signed when the president was campaigning and preparing for election. Now, given that most Nigerians, as well as religious elites, have already expressed their support for SSMPA, the president signing the bill was only a scheme to sort of secure votes or to get ahead of the vote. Now, the other part of my master's thesis went into this in more detail, where I was also examining the paradigm shift that happened, the paradigm shift in authority that happened, hence why we have religious elites running the country, right? So that part was explored in the other part of my thesis. But when we use the critical social theory, again, we are better able to apprise the healthcare system. Remember how we talked about how queer people often fear seeking help, seeking healthcare, how some of them do not want to test for HIV or STIs, how some of them feel comfortable testing in the comfort of their own home. When we use the critical social theory to apprise the healthcare system, what is made manifest is that in 1980, due to the downfall of the global economy, right? The healthcare system in Nigeria, as with the social economic system in Nigeria, has sort of been on a downward decline. Now, and it was around this time that Nigeria sort of signed onto the structural adjustment program. That was when they bought into the facade of the IMF and the World Bank and the foreign aid. Again, that's a different part of my thesis. But anyway, given the neoliberal havoc in Nigeria's economy, its healthcare system became nearly non-existent, and when available, rarely caters to the LGBTQ plus people. In fact, because of this, what we have seen is a high number, it has led to a high numbers of NGOs, some of which are now providing care to queer people under the guise of health promotion or HIV prevention to prevent arrest or to avoid legal consequences. And I think that this analysis best supports the findings about healthcare avoidance and the lack of access and people feeling more comfortable testing at home. But while we might commend NGOs for the amazing work of providing healthcare, it is not as simple as it looks, right? The NGOization of healthcare poses a problem because what it does is it puts the responsibility on the individual to now fulfill their right to healthcare, and in so doing absolves the government of their own responsibilities, right? And given the lack of federal oversight, or given the lack of oversight in the ways in which NGOs operate, little is known about the power dynamics between these organizations and LGBTQ plus people, who they provide services to, how they provide this service, what kind of services are provided, and even how power is weaponized. But I think that that should serve as direction for future research. Now, with all of this knowledge in mind, I must say that any attempt to improve the lives of queer people in Nigeria and anywhere else really must include not only the legalization of same-sex marriage, but also a departure from neoliberalism. In moving away from neoliberalism, the state, we can then have an active state that is involved in regulating, in funding, and investing in public health system, which anyone, regardless of their sexuality, can benefit from, right? And in legalizing same-sex marriage, LGBTQ plus people can benefit from the protection that the law offers, wherein violence towards them based on their sexuality is seen as a hate crime and disavowed. But in a different time and different lecture, knowing fully well the global and national tensions that really led up to the SSMPA, which this presentation did not fully explore, I believe, and I truly believe, that any attempt to improve the lives of queer people must decenter the Western gaze. Again, the SSNPA is not only a tool that was enacted when the president was seeking re-election. That was one of the events happening on a national level. But on a global level, remember how we talked about 2006, the homosexuality being the bill to criminalize homosexuality being introduced in 2006 and 2008. Nigeria was only following a global trend where most African countries were sort of criminalizing homosexuality again, right? So on a global trend, what we were seeing was a recriminalization of homosexuality as a way to reclaim the sovereignty of a state. In 1980, Nigeria had to, in the 1980s, Nigeria had to sign onto the facade of the IMF, right? They bought into the structural adjustment program as a way to defend its sovereignty, right? As a way to preserve its sovereignty, because of the global because of the global trend in the downfall of economy, particularly in both African and Latin American countries, right? Now, in 2006, 2008, leading up to 2014, Nigeria, as with many other African countries, we are facing intense pressure from the West, particularly from the Obama administration, to either accept homosexuality, right, or withdraw foreign aid. Now, Nigeria, to preserve its own sovereignty, decided to reject the SNPA. Decided to reject the foreign aid because they believed that homosexuality is un-African. Right? So these were some of the global trends that were happening, which is why I truly believe that if we want to improve the lives of queer people in both Nigeria and as with every other African country, we must decenter the Western gaze. We need a new economic and cultural arrangement that ensures alliance for everyone, including queer people, that is not threatened by the West's attempt to withhold foreign aid. This was explored in a different part of my analysis. I'm just going to leave us to stew on that. Now, moving on to the limitations of my research. No research is without its limitations, right? So some of the limitations of mine is that it's possible that some relevant articles were omitted, as I only used 3 electronic databases to collect results, right? And I also did a hand search. So it's possible that some relevant articles were missed. Also, the results of this review overwhelmingly applied to MSMs, like men who have sex with men. And that raises issues of equity, right? So while we can transfer rather the overarching findings, there is a need to do more research to understand the experiences of bisexual, lesbians and trans women in Nigeria, especially in light of the SSMPA. I think that is all I have for now. I'm going to leave us here, so please feel free to email me with any questions and we can chat some more. Bye for now. Okay.